address book, and I went through it, and I got to the end, and I thought, well, none of them are right. And then I had this sort of awful feeling that it's going to have to be me.
The microphone picks up everything. A podcast studio in London, late 2025. Giles Brandreth leans in. Across from him sits Charles Spencer, 9th Earl Spencer, brother to Diana, Princess of Wales. The recording light stays red. Then Earl Spencer says two words that will outlive the episode itself. He is explaining his sister's will. Diana named him legal guardian of her two sons, William and Harry, back in the 1990s. He tells Brandreth the appointment meant nothing in practice. The reason is simple. The other parent was still alive. 3 words, no name attached. But everyone listening already knows exactly who he means. Within hours, the clip travels. Royal reporters clip it, caption it, post it. Commentators note the phrasing feels deliberate, cold, precise. The kind of line a man chooses only after thinking it through. Some royal watchers call it a dig. Others call it simple legal fact stated out loud. Both readings survive the news cycle because Earl Spencer has never explained which one he meant. Hi viewers, quick question before we go further. If your sibling had been treated the way Diana was treated by the family she married into, would you stay quiet in public for the rest of your life? Or would you eventually say something? Drop your honest answer in the comments. This is not the first time Diana's brother has used a public platform to reopen old wounds inside the House of Windsor. It will not be the last. Each time he speaks, headlines return to a story most people assumed had closed decades ago. But this particular moment lands differently. It lands almost 30 years after her death, at a point when the king himself is managing a private and very public health battle, when Queen Camilla's position inside the institution is more settled than it has ever been, and when the next generation, Prince William and Catherine, are already being measured against the legacy their mother-in-law left behind. Earl Spencer was never a working royal. He never wore the uniform, never stood on the Buckingham Palace balcony, never signed off on official statements. He watched his sister's life from just outside the walls that mattered most. That distance is exactly why his words carry weight the palace cannot control. Diana's story was supposed to be settled history, a tragedy the family had processed, mourned, and moved past. Her brother's podcast appearance suggests otherwise, because somewhere behind the calm delivery and the careful phrasing, there is still a question nobody inside that family has ever fully answered in public. What actually happened to Diana inside that marriage, and who, decades later, still has to live with the answer? November 1995, a television screen. More than 20 million people in Britain alone stop what they are doing and watch Diana, Princess of Wales, sit alone in a chair at Kensington Palace and speak directly into a camera for BBC's Panorama. She wears dark eyeliner, a black jacket, and an expression few members of the royal family had ever allowed the public to see up close. Total honesty about pain. She does not read from a script the palace approved. She answers questions from journalist Martin Bashir about her marriage, her mental health, and her isolation inside an institution that valued silence over feeling. It becomes the most watched moment of her adult life, and it happens 14 years after the wedding that made her famous. Rewind to July 29, 1981. Lady Diana Spencer marries Charles, Prince of Wales, at St Paul's Cathedral. Global broadcast. A dress with a 25-foot train, a kiss on the Buckingham Palace balcony that the world reads as the start of a fairy tale. Nobody watching that day knows what is happening behind closed doors, inside a marriage shaped as much by duty as by love. The gap between the image and the reality becomes the entire story of the 1980s and early 1990s. Diana struggles with the pressure of royal life. She is candid later about her mental health during those years. The relationship between Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles, which began before his marriage to Diana, continues to shadow the marriage throughout. The media's presence never eased during those years. Photographers tracked Diana's movements, her outfits, and her expressions with an intensity no previous royal wife had faced. Newspapers ran competing versions of the marriage almost weekly, some sympathetic toward Diana, some loyal to the palace line. That constant coverage turned a private marital breakdown into a running national storyline years before either side confirmed anything in public.
As an inspirational woman to look up to, obviously to this day, and going forward and things. It is, it's a wonderful family. The members who I've met have achieved a lot, and very inspirational.
By December 1992, the pressure becomes public. Prime Minister John Major announces to the House of Commons that the Prince and Princess of Wales are separating. The divorce is finalised in August 1996. The monarchy is built to project stability, continuity, an institution larger than any single person inside it. Diana's willingness to describe her private suffering in public broke that model on live television, and the palace never fully recovered control of the story afterward. Royal historians have long debated what actually changed that November night. Some argue Diana simply told the truth, and the institution was never built to survive that kind of honesty. Others point out that the interview itself, later found to have been secured through deception by Bashir, complicates how much of that moment the public should even trust. Either way, one fact does not change. Before that broadcast, the royal family controlled its own narrative almost completely. After it, that control was gone for good. The marriage was already over by then. What nobody realized, watching that broadcast, was that the argument over what really happened to Diana was only getting started. September 6, 1997, Westminster Abbey. Charles Spencer, 9th Earl Spencer, stands at the pulpit above his sister's coffin. He begins to speak, and outside the Abbey doors, on giant screens set up along the procession route, hundreds of thousands of people are watching too. Partway through his eulogy, something happens that has never happened at a royal funeral before or since. Applause. It starts outside, among the crowd. It grows. It moves through the open doors and into the Abbey itself, reaching the mourners seated inside, including the royal family. Nobody planned that moment. Nobody could have. In that eulogy, Earl Spencer calls Diana the most hunted person of the modern age and speaks of protecting her memory and her son's upbringing. Royal commentators have long pointed to that speech as the first public sign that Diana's own family intended to hold the institution accountable for how she was treated, not simply mourn her quietly and step back. Earl Spencer was never a working royal. He held no palace role, drew no royal income, and answered to no communications office. That position outside the institution is exactly what has allowed him to keep speaking when official royal voices stay silent. In 2017, ahead of the 20th anniversary of Diana's death, he told the BBC he had been misled about William and Harry walking behind their mother's coffin, calling it one of the most painful parts of that day. In 2022, he wrote publicly that he felt manipulated by Bashir during the run-up to the Panorama interview, describing being shown fabricated bank statements as part of the deception. In 2025, on Giles Brandreth's podcast, he raised the guardianship comment that reignited headlines all over again. And into 2026, he has continued backing journalist Andy Webb's book, examining exactly how that 1995 interview was obtained, publicly urging the BBC to open its files for good. There is a question worth sitting with here. Why does a private citizen with no royal duties, no crown income, and no press office often land harder on the public than an official statement from Buckingham Palace itself? Part of the answer is trust. Palace statements pass through committees and legal review before release. Earl Spencer answers live, on a podcast microphone, without that filter. Audiences hear the difference, even when they cannot name it. None of this happens inside a palace briefing room. All of it happens on his own terms, in his own words, decades apart, and each time the public listens. Family members without royal titles to protect often say the things institutions cannot. But defending a sister's memory for close to 30 years has slowly pulled Earl Spencer into a much larger fight, one involving a broadcaster, a king, and a story that refuses to stay buried. No statement. That is what came out of Clarence House and Buckingham Palace after Earl Spencer's guardianship remarks spread across every royal news outlet in Britain. No press release, no spokesperson quote, no denial. Royal reporters waited. Nothing arrived. And inside an institution built entirely on the careful release of words, that silence said something on its own. Queen Camilla was never named directly in that podcast clip, but everyone tracking the story understood the comment sat one step away from her too, because Camilla's presence inside Charles's story cannot be separated from Diana's. The history is documented, and does not require speculation. Camilla Shand met Charles in the early 1970s, before either of them married anyone else. She married Andrew Parker Bowles in 1973. Charles married Diana in 1981. The friendship between Charles and Camilla continued during Charles's marriage, a fact confirmed publicly for decades by biographers, royal historians, and by Charles himself, who acknowledged infidelity after his marriage had irretrievably broken down during a televised documentary interview with Jonathan Dimbleby.
I need to do this for my family. This is not a surprise to anybody. It's really sad that it's got to this point, but I've got to do something for my own mental health, for my wife's, and for Archie's as well, because I could see.
In 1994, Camilla divorced Parker Bowles in 1995, the same year as Diana's Panorama interview. Diana died in 1997. Charles and Camilla married in a civil ceremony at Windsor Guildhall on April 9, 2005, followed by a service of blessing at St. George's Chapel. For years afterward, Camilla held the title Duchess of Cornwall, a deliberate choice that avoided the more historically loaded title of Princess of Wales, the title that had belonged to Diana. When Queen Elizabeth II died in September 2022 and Charles became king, Camilla became Queen Consort. In February 2023, Buckingham Palace confirmed she would simply be known as Queen Camilla going forward, a title upgrade some royal commentators described as the final formal step in her decades-long transition from tabloid controversy to accepted head of household figure. Public opinion took a longer road than the paperwork did. For much of the 1990s and 2000s, Camilla carried the weight of public anger that many people felt on Diana's behalf. Press coverage across those decades reflected real hostility toward her, often fierce and personal. That hostility has softened considerably since the 2005 marriage, and softened further since the coronation in May 2023, according to years of published royal approval polling in British media. Two things can be true in the same sentence, and royal commentators frequently point this out. Camilla built a working, publicly respected role over 2 decades of patient institutional service. And for a large number of people who lived through the 1990s, watching Diana's marriage collapse in real time, that history does not simply disappear because time passed and titles changed. There is a harder question underneath all of this, one royal commentators return to often. Can a person become fully accepted by history while still standing at the center of someone else's documented pain? The palace's answer, through 2 decades of careful public relations, has effectively been yes. But acceptance is not the same as forgetting, and Earl Spencer's comment landed exactly on that gap. Earl Spencer's guardianship comment did not mention Camilla by name. It did not need to. Some sentences carry weight because of who is listening, not just who is speaking. And somewhere in that silence from the palace, a bigger question was already forming, one that had almost nothing to do with 1981 or 1995, and everything to do with who inherits this story next. March 2024. Buckingham Palace confirms King Charles III has stepped back from public duties for treatment, following his cancer diagnosis announced the month before. Around the same time, the Princess of Wales is undergoing her own preventive chemotherapy after a separate cancer diagnosis. For a stretch of that spring, 2 future and current heads of the family are being treated at once, and Prince William, Prince of Wales, is left carrying a heavier share of public royal duties than any heir has carried in decades, at a younger age than his father ever did. The physical signs stayed visible too. At Trooping the Colour, the King and Queen Camilla rode in a carriage instead of on horseback for the 2nd year running, a quiet marker of ongoing recovery rather than a full return to form. Most recently, in July 2026, Prince Harry offered his own rare update, telling guests at a New York gala that his father is doing great, the first public comment on the King's condition in months. He steps into investitures. He represents the monarchy at state events his father would normally attend. He does it largely without complaint, without a tell-all interview, without reopening any old family argument in public. Royal commentators have widely noted that William's approach to this pressure looks nothing like the guarded, formal distance the institution relied on during his grandmother's decades on the throne. By December 2025, King Charles announces his own treatment schedule will be reduced heading into 2026, calling it a personal blessing, while a palace spokesperson describes his condition moving into what officials term a precautionary phase, continuously monitored and reviewed. The king is still working. The line of succession has not moved. But the last 2 years have made one thing clear to royal watchers. William's readiness to lead is no longer a hypothetical conversation confined to academic royal commentary. It is a live, ongoing test happening in public, in real time, with no script to follow.
Work you've achieved. In the past 12 years, I can honestly say that one of my greatest pleasures has been my association with people like yourself. During those years, I've met many thousands of wonderful...
Alongside Catherine, Princess of Wales, William has built a public identity heavily centred on mental health, a focus that traces directly back to the Heads Together campaign he launched with Harry and Catherine in 2016, years before he became heir apparent. That campaign, and the causes that followed it, represent a deliberate departure from the stiff upper lip royal tradition Diana herself struggled against decades earlier. Succession law itself changed to reflect a more modern institution. The Succession to the Crown Act of 2013 ended centuries of male preference primogeniture, meaning Princess Charlotte keeps her place in the line ahead of her younger brother, Prince Louis, regardless of gender. Royal analysts have repeatedly connected that legal shift to the same broader cultural pressure that Diana's public honesty first exposed back in the 1990s, an institution slowly, sometimes reluctantly, adjusting itself to modern expectations. Whether that adjustment goes far enough is a different question entirely, because updating a title, a law, or a communication strategy is one thing. Repairing 30 years of unresolved public memory is something else. And nobody, inside or outside the palace gates, has proven yet that the second one is actually happening. May 2015. Newsrooms across London open a set of letters the government fought for 10 years to keep sealed. Reporters call them the Black Spider Memos, named for the King's distinct, slanted handwriting style, used when he wrote them as Prince of Wales. 27 letters sent to government ministers between 2004 and 2005, lobbying on subjects ranging from farming to military equipment. The Guardian journalist Rob Evans first requested them in 2005. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court before judges finally ordered their release. Parliament made sure that fight would never happen again. In 2010, lawmakers passed the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act, which changed Section 37 of the Freedom of Information Act. Starting in January 2011, any correspondence involving the sovereign, the heir apparent, or the second in line to the throne became absolutely exempt from disclosure. No court order, no decade-long legal battle, no Black Spider memos ever again. Royal communications operates on a principle older than the current king himself, often summarized in 4 words: never complain, never explain. Reporters who cover the palace describe an operation built to manage headlines quietly, correct factual errors through background briefings rather than public statements, and let most controversies fade on their own timeline instead of reacting to every claim in real time. That single legal change tells you almost everything about how the modern monarchy protects itself. Security costs for the royal family are not published, and estimates from royal correspondents range from several £1,000,000 to well over £100 million a year. Assets passed directly from one sovereign to the next, under a 1993 arrangement, remain exempt from inheritance tax, a protection no other family in Britain receives. The Duchy of Cornwall and Duchy of Lancaster, the private estates that fund the King and the Prince of Wales, are not required to pay corporation tax, a structure that has drawn criticism from members of Parliament for years. None of this is secret in the sense of being hidden. It is documented publicly, argued over in select committee hearings, written about by financial journalists every year. But it is also almost never explained in the kind of detail that would let an ordinary taxpayer fully follow the money. The silence itself became part of the story. That pattern repeats whenever the institution faces something it cannot fully control. When Prince Andrew's association with Jeffrey Epstein became impossible to manage through statements alone, the palace did not hold a tribunal or issue a detailed accounting. It quietly stripped his military titles and royal patronages in 2022, and he stopped using the style His Royal Highness in public life. No trial, no official rebuke, just a slow withdrawal from view. Royal commentators have long debated whether this approach protects the dignity of the family or simply avoids the accountability the public actually wants. Because a powerful institution rarely announces what it is protecting. It simply decides, case by case, what the public gets to see and what stays behind a door that never quite opens. March 10th, 2024. Mother's Day in the United Kingdom.
I guess on top of that as well, probably what people don't know, but that is mentioned in the judgment today, Ravek protect private citizens. You know, I was made a private citizen by the royal household, not by Ravek, by the royal household. I can't be a private citizen. I will never be seen as a private citizen. I will never be treated as a private citizen.
Kensington Palace releases a photograph of Catherine, Princess of Wales, surrounded by her 3 children, her first official image since abdominal surgery 2 months earlier. Within hours, the world's biggest photo agencies, Associated Press, Reuters, and Getty, issue a rare kill notice, pulling the image entirely, citing evidence of manipulation. A sleeve here, a zipper there. Small, technical inconsistencies. Kensington Palace admits Catherine had edited the photograph herself, a common practice among amateur photographers, and apologizes for the confusion. But the apology does not end anything. It starts something bigger. Online theories multiply by the hour. Some claim Catherine is seriously ill. Others claim the marriage is in trouble. Others go further, insisting she has not been seen in public in months, and something is being hidden. None of it is confirmed. All of it spreads. On March 22nd, 2024, Catherine releases a video statement revealing she has been undergoing preventive chemotherapy following a cancer diagnosis, ending weeks of speculation with a fact far more serious than any of the rumors that preceded it. That sequence, from an edited photo to a global conspiracy to a genuine medical diagnosis, shows exactly how royal rumors take root. Access to the family is tightly controlled. Official statements arrive slowly and say little. Into that gap steps social media, tabloid speculation, and anonymous sourcing, each filling in the blanks with whatever story travels fastest. Royal biographers have long debated whether this pattern helps or hurts the institution over time. The same gap in verified information that fueled the Kate Middleton theories has also fueled decades of Diana-related speculation, from her final months to the true nature of specific conversations inside the marriage. Nobody outside a very small circle actually knows every detail, and anyone claiming certainty about private royal conversations is speculating, however confidently they present it. The same pattern applies to Diana's story, to Camilla's, to Earl Spencer's guardianship comment. Some parts are fact, confirmed by dates, documents, and direct quotes. Diana's 1981 wedding date is fact. The Panorama broadcast date is fact. The 2005 marriage between Charles and Camilla is fact. But the motives behind a comment, the private feelings inside a marriage, the meaning behind a moment of palace silence, those remain interpretation, however confidently they get repeated online. Royal commentators have long warned that separating the two is not always easy, especially when an institution built on limited access leaves so much room for a story to fill itself in. April 2017. A podcast microphone again, this time held by mental health campaigner Bryony Gordon. Prince Harry, 20 years after standing behind his mother's coffin as a boy, tells her he spent most of his 20s in what he calls total chaos, and that he eventually sought professional counselling in his late 20s after coming close to a breakdown. It is the first time a senior member of the royal family has described therapy in his own words, on the record, without a palace statement smoothing the edges first. Weeks later, William, Catherine, and Harry launch Heads Together, a campaign built entirely around one idea their grandmother's generation would never have approved of in public: talking openly about mental health. Interviews follow, documentaries follow. In the 2017 ITV film marking 20 years since Diana's death, both brothers described their grief in language no previous generation of royals had used on camera: plain, unpolished, and personal. None of this happens by accident. Royal commentators have repeatedly connected these moments directly back to Diana herself, who spoke about her own mental health struggles and her feelings of isolation, decades before the institution around her was ready to hear it. She lost that argument during her lifetime. The 1995 Panorama interview, whatever its flaws, aired scenes of royal vulnerability the public had never witnessed before. 3 decades later, her sons built entire public identities around the same honesty that once cost her so much support inside the family. Diana's charity work followed a similar pattern years before her sons picked up that same instinct. In April 1987, she shook the hand of a man hospitalized with HIV without wearing gloves, at a moment when public fear and stigma around AIDS ran deep across Britain. A gesture credited by public health historians with shifting attitudes faster than any government campaign of that decade. She later became one of the world's most visible campaigners against landmines. Both causes used personal visibility to move public opinion, rather than formal statements from an institution unwilling to take risks. That is the real reveal sitting underneath this whole story. It was never really about who won an old argument between a princess and an institution. Diana's actual legacy may be simpler and larger than that. She permanently changed what the public is allowed to expect from the people wearing the crown. Emotional honesty is no longer treated as a scandal inside that family. It is treated, increasingly, as part of the job. But every rule change creates a new set of costs, and those costs rarely land evenly. When an institution transforms to survive, someone always ends up paying a price for how slowly or how quickly that transformation happens. And inside this particular family, it is still not clear who that will be. A different interview, a different year, 2024. Earl Spencer sits across from the BBC's Laura Koonsberg, not to talk about Diana this time, but about himself. He describes being sent away to boarding school as a young boy and the abuse he suffered there, material he later placed in his memoir, A Very Private School. He tells her that privilege, titles, and inherited wealth did nothing to protect him as a child. The interview airs, and for the first time, the public understands something about the man who has spent nearly 3 decades defending his sister. His own story was never simple either. That context changes how his other comments land. The guardianship remark on Giles Brandreth's podcast, the funeral eulogy in 1997, the years spent pushing the BBC over the Bashir deception. None of it reads the same once you know Earl Spencer's own account of his childhood. He is not simply a brother protecting a legacy from a distance. He is a man who understands, in a very direct and personal way, what it costs a child to grow up inside institutions built to project perfection while quietly failing the people inside them. Diana was a sister to him, a mother to William and Harry, a princess to the world, and eventually a cautionary tale to the institution she married into. King Charles, Queen Camilla, William and Harry each carry a different piece of that legacy now, shaped by where they stood when it was written. Charles carries the weight of decisions made in the 1980s and 1990s. Camilla carries decades of public judgment for a relationship that predated her marriage by more than 30 years. William carries the responsibility of leading an institution his mother once tried to change from the inside. Harry carries a version of the story that eventually pushed him thousands of miles away from the family altogether. Blame is the easy read here, easy for anyone who wants a clear villain and a clear victim. But 3 decades on, that framing struggles to hold up. Charles was a young man navigating a marriage shaped by duty as much as feeling, inside a family that discouraged emotional conversation with anyone, including its own children. Camilla absorbed decades of public anger for choices made in her 20s, choices she did not make entirely alone. None of that erases what Diana went through. It simply means the full picture holds more than one perspective at once, the kind of nuance a headline was never built to carry. Royal commentators have debated for years whether Diana's presence damaged the monarchy or forced it to become something stronger. Maybe the honest answer is that both things happened at once, and the family has spent every year since trying to decide which one they are more willing to admit. Back to that podcast studio. 2 words: the other parent. That is where this story started, and it is worth remembering that Earl Spencer never raised his voice, never accused anyone directly, and never asked for public sympathy. He simply told the truth as he understood it, and let the silence from the palace do the rest of the talking. Here is what is actually known. Diana married into an institution not built for the kind of honesty she eventually offered it. She separated in 1992, divorced in 1996, and died in 1997, at the exact moment the argument over her treatment was only getting louder. Charles and Camilla built a life together that the public eventually accepted, even if it never fully forgot how that story began. William and Harry inherited a version of the monarchy already forced to change by their mother's example, whether the institution admits that openly or not. What remains debated is harder to settle. Whether Earl Spencer's comments come from grief, principle, or something else entirely. Whether the palace's silence is dignity or avoidance. Whether 30 years is long enough to call any of this resolved. Diana's story was never really about a title or a crown. It was about a person who insisted on being seen exactly as she was, inside a family built to keep everyone hidden behind the same careful image. That is the part of her legacy nobody has managed to undo, no matter how much time passes. If this story kept you watching until the very end, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next chapter in this family's history is always closer than it looks. Leave a comment with your own take on what you just heard and share this video with someone who needs a story like this today.